It was never meant to leave those walls. Yet the instant King Charles lowered that pen, something far more dangerous than ink quietly slipped free. This wasn't merely a royal decision. It became a silent line carved forever. A line destined to slice through blood, history, and everything that once kept a fractured family barely holding together. And that's where everything turns chilling. What appeared to be an ordinary administrative step was anything but ordinary. Every detail was tightly controlled, carefully calculated, and executed behind sealed doors where even the atmosphere carried unbearable consequence. No cameras, no spectators beyond a carefully selected handful. Just a father and a monarch standing on opposite sides of the same irreversible crossroad. When Charles stepped inside that restricted room, he greeted absolutely nobody. That silence wasn't protocol, it was pure pressure. 2 constitutional advisors remained motionless. The keeper of the privy purse tracked every movement as though history itself unfolded before their eyes. At the center rested a sealed folder, plain outside, devastating within, because everyone present already understood exactly what those pages contained. More importantly, they understood everything those pages would erase. Not merely a title, not merely a role, but the final bridge somehow left standing despite years of public division. Then came the detail that changes absolutely everything. This wasn't about stripping Prince Harry of something he actively used. No, this was about erasing possibility, about sealing the final invisible doorway where hope still managed to survive. For years, uncertainty remained, leaving room, silence, and space that many interpreted as forgiveness waiting patiently ahead. But this document erased every ounce of ambiguity with ruthless precision. It didn't simply declare not now. It declared not ever again. When Charles reached Harry's name, he paused. Not because of ceremony, not because of spectacle, but because something inside him resisted. For one fleeting second, the monarch vanished. Only the father remained. His grip tightened, his expression changed, and within that hesitation, something painfully fragile nearly survived. Then it disappeared. The signature came next. Clean, final, undeniable. What makes everything even more disturbing is what unfolded immediately afterward. Because this wasn't symbolic. This wasn't crafted for headlines. This became a system-wide purge. Internal records, ceremonial lists, protocol documents, every single trace of Harry's formal presence within the royal institution disappeared quietly, efficiently, almost surgically, while staff received one unmistakable warning: speak nothing or face immediate dismissal. Think about that. Even silence was tightly managed. But here's where the emotional divide cuts even deeper, because this wasn't created overnight. This wasn't one decision triggered by one single event. No, this hadn't appeared overnight. It had been growing through every interview, every accusation, every moment private conflict spilled into public view. Charles had been carrying an impossible burden, becoming a father willing to forgive while remaining a king unable to overlook everything. Eventually, those 2 identities crashed together. Meanwhile, Prince William stood directly beside that collision. When he finished reading the summary, he offered no immediate reaction. Once again, silence filled the room, but this silence carried something entirely different. It held recognition, understanding, and something even heavier: acceptance. William wasn't simply witnessing events unfold. He recognized exactly what could never be reversed once everything began. He understood this wasn't solely about Harry. It was about protecting the future of the crown itself. Then came Queen Camilla, observing everything through a perspective nobody else possessed. She had watched Charles shoulder the burden of this decision long before that document even existed. She witnessed the exhaustion, the restraint, the quiet attempts to preserve something already falling apart. So when she quietly asked whether he was certain, she already knew his answer. She simply needed to hear those words spoken aloud. Yet the most alarming detail wasn't the signature. It wasn't the removal. It wasn't even the silence afterward. It was the date. A handwritten note, nearly invisible yet impossible to dismiss. That date matched a private royal ceremony, one never intended to matter beyond those walls. Suddenly everything changed. Suddenly it became the missing puzzle piece. The exact moment something crossed a boundary nobody could ever reverse. Because what if this wasn't merely about years of growing tension? What if something unfolded that evening? Something forcing Charles to stop waiting, abandon hope, and finally take action. Whatever happened during that private Windsor ceremony wasn't loud, theatrical, or explosive on the surface, but it never needed to be because sometimes the quietest moments create the most devastating consequences. The room remained sealed from public eyes, tightly controlled, filled with familiar faces believing, if only briefly, history might pause, tension might fade, and grief might reunite what conflict had shattered. It was supposed to honor remembrance. Instead, it became the moment everything finally collapsed. Charles permitted Prince Harry into that gathering in the most restricted way imaginable, through a secure video connection, monitored, limited, and temporary. That detail matters because it reveals something important. Despite everything, despite interviews, distance, and public fallout, one fragile thread still survived. Thin, delicate, yet undeniably present. Charles made a choice during that moment that would eventually haunt him forever. He trusted that thread. He spoke cautiously, weighing every sentence, not as a king addressing his subject, but as a father allowing his son access to words almost nobody else was ever supposed to hear. Those conversations focused upon the future, the transition of power, and the quiet mechanisms ensuring the monarchy survived its next chapter. These weren't public talking points, they were deeply private truth. Before that call concluded, Charles revealed something even more telling. He asked Harry to protect everything, not through a command, but through a heartfelt request. Harry agreed. That promise carried far more than simple words. It carried expectation. It carried the final surviving fragment of trust. 48 hours later, that trust completely shattered because somewhere far away from Windsor, an overseas media producer allegedly received information they were never supposed to possess. Phrases, details, precise language that could only have originated from that conversation, not ordinary leaks, not broad summaries, but specific wording, unmistakable expressions, the kind of detail rarely escapes accidentally, the kind seemingly pointing toward a source. When Prince William read those words, he required no further confirmation. He recognized them immediately, identical phrasing, identical tone, identical structure. His father had spoken only once inside that private room. At that exact moment, something changed within him forever. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't uncertainty. It became absolute certainty. Charles, however, responded very differently. No fury, no explosion, only one question repeated over and over. Could there possibly be another explanation? That repetition mattered because it exposed what Charles was truly doing. He wasn't investigating the leak. He was desperately searching for any reason not to believe it. When the security assessment eventually traced everything back toward Harry's circle, that search finally ended. This wasn't merely a breach, it was complete exposure. It meant private royal planning, timelines, transitions, responsibilities had quietly reached people capable of exploiting them, distorting them, weaponizing them. Suddenly, this wasn't about family anymore. It became about vulnerability at the very highest level of the monarchy. That's when Charles made his decision. Not instantly, not emotionally, but with absolute certainty. He summoned Harry for one final meeting. No advisors, no witnesses, no protective barriers, only father and son with everything stripped away except truth and whatever version each believed. The location wasn't a palace chamber. It was Clarence House. That decision wasn't accidental because Charles wanted to begin as a father instead of a monarch. Yet the instant Harry walked inside and saw him standing there waiting, not welcoming, that illusion disappeared. This wasn't reconciliation. This was judgment. Charles quietly placed the report upon the table. No speeches, no dramatic build-up, only one question. Direct, unavoidable, and Harry denied everything. Not gently, not cautiously, but firmly. Then something far more revealing happened. The anger arrived immediately, sharp, defensive. He didn't merely reject the accusation. He attacked the entire system behind it. He accused the palace of playing the very same hidden game for years. Suddenly, the room wasn't about a leak anymore. It became about years of resentment colliding with years of restraint. Charles never stepped backward. That's crucial because this became the moment everything might have changed. Had he softened, hesitated, or chosen fatherhood above kingship, this story could have ended differently. But he refused. He stood firm and delivered the words that sealed every door. Grievance does not excuse betrayal. That sentence didn't merely answer Harry. It determined everything because from that instant onward there was no path through explanation, justification, or emotion, only consequence. Harry's anger transformed into something deeper. Pain, genuine, unfiltered, completely exposed. He asked the question hiding beneath everything. Was he ever truly meant to return, or had he been tested from the very beginning? Charles answered with a truth both honest and heartbreaking. He had hoped Harry would return, but trust had been shattered far too many times. Then came the moment that sealed everything forever. Charles removed his signet ring and gently placed it upon the table. Not tossed aside, not slammed down. Carefully placed, a quiet gesture carrying enormous meaning. Identity, authority, finality. He wasn't debating anymore. He was deciding. Harry departed before the meeting ended. That mattered because the conversation never found resolution. It never truly closed. It splintered apart. Once that door closed behind him, Charles wasted no time. He called for the document, the final instrument, the one transforming everything that had happened into something permanent. When he returned to that desk, that familiar pen, and that familiar name, every trace of hesitation had vanished. By then, this was no longer about what already happened. It was about what could never be permitted again. And the most unsettling part, even after the confrontation, the decision, the decree, one dangerous question still lingered unanswered.